Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. That's this crazy situation with Florida State Clemson realignment. And I know, listen, I don't want to say this is big, and it is clear that Florida State wants out, and every single day it feels like there's a new twist on it, and there was certainly an interesting twist at SEC Media Days this week, where we last left this story on Monday. So first of all, I think everybody knows, but Florida State Clemson in the ACC, I believe, and I know for a fact, that since the day that Texas and Oklahoma left for the SEC from the Big 12, Florida State and later on Clemson and maybe some of these other schools in the ACC have been trying to find a way out of the ACC. Florida State, fair or not, views itself on equal footing with these SEC schools, and they are sitting there saying, wait a second now, why does Florida get $70, $80 million in TV money? We should be making just as much. We need to be whatever. And basically, they have been trying to sabotage their way out of the ACC since the moment in time that Texas and Oklahoma left for the SEC. They want the same money, and I think understandably, they feel like if we fall too far behind financially, it's going to be hard for us to make up and keep up in this new world of college sports. And so over the last couple days, first of all, on Sunday into Monday, my buddy Jason Scheer, who covers Arizona, of course, now in the Arizona is now in the Big 12. Jason Scheer, following Big 12 Media Days, reported that he believes that Florida State and Clemson will be in the ACC, leaving the ACC for the Big 12 within the next year. His report, it's pinned to his Twitter feed. He's not, running from the report, is that he believes that that Florida State and Clemson will be able to get out of that ACC contract and become members of the Big 12. Where it gets complicated, as we've discussed, is a few things. I think, one, there's a legitimate argument. Is the Big 12 actually better than the ACC? I would say they're about equal. I would say whatever. But beyond that, it isn't just a game of musical chairs. It isn't just fantasy football. You can't just trade and do whatever. Florida State, as part of the ACC, has a TV contract that takes them through 2036, and there is what's called a grant of rights, in which Florida State would have to pay hundreds of millions of dollars to get out of. And so that's why Florida State's still in the ACC. We heard the Big 12 report, but there were two interesting follow-ups in the previous couple days. The first one came from Brett McMurphy, because at the end of the day, Brett McMurphy, at the end of the day, yeah, you could go to the Big 12, but if you're Florida State and Clemson, wouldn't you want to go to the SEC or the Big 10 if possible? Well, according to Brett McMurphy, that's not in the cards, because on Tuesday, he put out a report. Big 10, SEC, unlikely to add Florida State if it leaves the ACC and the ACC survives, sources told me. Big 10 and SEC don't want FSU because adding FSU doesn't make financial sense, and there's no desire to expand. Plus, they've been a, quote, disruptive partner, sources say. And so the bottom line is the reason that Florida State and Clemson might be going to the Big 12 if they leave the ACC is there really isn't another landing spot. And so that was where we left things. But to their credit, Next Round Live out of Alabama had Greg Sankey on their show, and he actually was asked directly about Florida State specifically, and here is what he had to say. I thought this was a very, very, very interesting quote from Greg Sankey. You could see the tweet on your screen. He said, we're, quote, not going to take our pie and slice it into more pieces. Let me take it even a step further. To read the whole quote, he said, our presidents have been very clear. We're not going to be entangled in legal issues around consideration of expansion, so it's not a conversation. Then he gets to that quote you just saw on the screen. We're not going to take our pie and slice it into more pieces. They have to help grow the pie. That quote courtesy of Greg Sankey on Next Round Live. And so at the end of the day, you can break down this Florida State, their future, what's happening, what's going to happen, what could happen. But to me, the simplest way to explain what's going on with Florida State and what their future may or may not be, it comes from a simple quote from my old buddy, JJ Redick. Remember JJ Redick? Remember when he called me an F-head because he didn't like what I said about basketball? In that, he said the reason, whatever, but there was a quote in which he said, it's a math equation, F-head. It's a math equation, F-head. Now, in terms of JJ Redick, current Lakers coach, he was talking about me. But in terms of Florida State leaving the ACC to go anywhere else, and again, to be clear, I respect the hell out of Jason Scheer. This isn't criticizing that report or any other report. But to me, I just look at this, and to quote JJ Redick, it is a very simple math equation. I simply don't see how the math adds up. And I think Greg Sankey, really to his credit, put it out crystal clear for all to see on Thursday at SEC Media Days. Because for me, when you look at the Florida State Clemson situation, a reminder, what did I just say? To get out of that ACC grant of rights, it is hundreds of millions of dollars. Obviously, no athletic department in the country can raise that kind of money. And what gets interesting is that's where the Big 12 comes in, because there have been reports that the Big 12 plans on taking on private equity money. In other words, they're going to take money from one of these big banks, venture capital, whatever, and infuse it into the athletic departments to get it on equal footing with the SEC and the Big Ten. Remember, the Big Ten and the SEC are making like $70+ million a year in TV money. The ACC, about half of that. The Big 12, a little bit more. Big 12 making more than the ACC. But even if you take all this hype, I'm back. We had a technical issue there. We'll get it all figured out, okay? But when you look at the situation with Florida State and Clemson, it is a simple math equation because, again, first off, what did I just say? Hundreds of millions of dollars to get them out of the TV contract. Two, and this is where it's important, even if you're taking on private equity money, the money doesn't still add up. And I was saying this before I got disconnected. I know this is nerdy. I know it's a math equation, F-Ed, but this is an important part of this, is that if you're taking hundreds of millions of dollars, the goal is to be on equal footing with the SEC and the Big Ten. So if you're taking on hundreds of millions of dollars just to get out of your ACC contract, are you then going to have $35+ million to get on equal footing financially with the SEC and the Big Ten? Unless you're taking out $500 million, you can't do it. And then, by the way, what about the other 16 teams in the ACC? You think Central Florida and Arizona State are going to be happy just taking way less money than Florida State Clemson? It doesn't make sense. And by the way, for the people that are going to sit there and say, well, Torres, have you ever heard of the fact that if they get Florida State and Clemson, that it'll change the TV contract and they'll make more money? Yeah, I get it. But is it going to be so much money that they can pay back hundreds of millions of dollars in investment? By the way, I'm talking nerdy venture capital stuff. I hope all this stuff makes sense. But people were saying, well, if they get Florida State and Clemson, their TV value goes up. But how much does it really go up? Listen, Florida State is a very big brand. Clemson is a very big brand. But do they move the needle enough in hundreds of millions of dollars in direction? No. You know how I knew that? It's two simple reasons. One, because if they were that valuable, the ACC contract would be worth way more than it is. But two, you know how I know that they're not valuable? Because Greg Sankey literally just said it. He said, we're not going to take our pie and slice it into more pieces. They have to grow the pie. And so look, we can debate, we can argue, is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? What Greg Sankey is saying is, if we bring them in, they're not going to grow what we're doing. Texas and Oklahoma did. Notre Dame might if they were somehow available. USC and UCLA did for the Big Ten. But Florida State and Clemson will not grow the pie if they come to the SEC. And so it's not to say that Florida State and Clemson can't be on the move. But I know nobody wants to believe Greg Sankey. But I just believe what Greg Sankey says here. He says, like, yeah, if the whole league falls apart, maybe we'll consider taking them because, we won't have to, there will be no, there will be no, what was his exact quote? There will be, he said, we don't want to be entangled in legal issues around any expansion. So there'd be no legal issues. But if it comes down to we have to fight to get them out of the ACC contract, they're just not worth it. They're not worth enough money for us to seriously consider doing. And so I'll be fascinated what happens with this Florida State Clemson stuff. They clearly want out of the ACC. I'm just not sold that they have a great landing spot. As I said, presidents have very clearly said that they are not interested in adding them. You go back to the original Brett McMurphy tweet from the other day. Brett McMurphy talked about it. He said, look, the Big Ten and SEC don't make financial sense. They don't want to expand, and they've been a disruptive partner. And so maybe at the end of the day, maybe the Big 12, but even the Big 12, is it really a better situation? And do the financials make sense? So I'll be fascinated. Florida State and Clemson clearly are not happy. But just because you're not happy, I don't know that anything pressing is happening. And again, Greg Sankey talked about it, and I don't get the sense that we are anywhere close to Florida State and Clemson leaving, especially for the SEC.